Kroos. Y el cara a cara con Mbappé, ya nos veremos en Madrid. Si es que Toni continúa también, ¿no? En la Casa Blanca. Gil Manzano que vuelve a verse las caras con futbolistas del Real Madrid tras lo ocurrido en Mestalla.
¿Te acordás?
Y el polémico. Empieza este viaje que compartimos con Marcelo Espina. Y el primer ataque es para Florian Wirtz. ¡Golazo! ¡Gol! Florian Wirtz, golazo del talento. Kroos que lanza la bola, linda pelota, la aparición de Havertz, la tocó Pavard, justo Salvador Pavard. Ahí el Lyon le llega a Mbappé, la persecución de Musiala, Mbappé, sube Lucas, ahí va Hernández, cruzan de primer cartel, entre 100 euros, ahí va otra vez, amenazando Wirtz, Gundogan, llegaba Havertz y cruza. Ya en la cancha sube, allí Mittelstadt, ya estaremos buscando registros, ¿no? De goles tempraneros en la historia de es el que marca el destino de la pelota y del juego, que es Florian Wirtz, el centro con zurda. Llegaba Musiala y claro, tanto Wirtz como Musiala, Mbappé. Sube el balón Mbappé, sube la electricidad en la cancha, el Lyon. Mbappé se olvidó a divide ya. Allí va Andrich, toca Gundogan, la quería Musiala. Bien, en el medio Rabiot. Kunde, Musiala, relación Mbappé, Lucas, va Mbappé, llega Toni Kroos, el lector Toni Kroos, con el libro en la mano, llegaba Havertz con horrible, Kylian Mbappé defendido por Kimmich, Mbappé con el taco para Zaire Emery, bien por Kimmich, toca y acompaña, dentro está Andrich que se puede animar, o lo hará Toni, no, Toni distribuye, va Toni Kroos, falta de Zaire Emery. En el duelo generacional, el chico Emery.
Resultado a favor, no.
Sí, se mueve Antonio Rüdiger. Mirá cómo sale Antonio, pero decidió jugar para Taj. Devolvió Pavard. ¿Quién sale? Antonio Rüdiger. Mbappé y Antonio. Mbappé ante Antonio. Es de Jazz Fontaine, ¿no? Que sí. Mosquito sobre Musiala. Nada, dice el árbitro. Juega Thuram. La tiene Koundé, Dembélé. No, Thuram. Con la zurda. Quedaba estacado Ter Stegen, alta y afuera en casi 20. Que recordemos tuvo su conflicto con Deschamps, ¿no? En la Copa del Mundo. Apareció en Rabiot al Chouameni buscará el centro para Thuram, lo juega por abajo con Mbappé, casi le llega a Thuram, lo tocó justo Kroos, salió Mittelstadt. Zurda Dembélé, buscando remate, Dembélé, recorta para la derecha, Dembélé al medio, buena, saca Robert Andrich. Picando aquí, la chispa de Dembélé que busca más. Dembélé por afuera de Mittelstadt, centro de Dembélé pasado y para Mbappé. Agua. Le quedó picando a Kylian. Al borde, al filo, el equipo galo. Dembélé libre a Dembélé. Hasta aquí el desequilibrio de Francia. Dembélé, falta de Mittelstadt.
Tarjeta. Sí, Gil Manzano. Derecha, redoblando la marca sobre...
Justamente Dembélé, el mosquito con el centro venenoso. Llegó Rabiot. Lo de Wirtz. Centro de Zaire Emery. Entraba Thuram. Llegó Antonio Rüdiger. Kroos que ganó. Wirtz, Kroos. Ataca Mbappé para empatarlo. Mbappé, Ter Stegen en un anticipo quizá de un duelo clásico. Dembélé a la espalda de Mittelstadt. Dembélé al medio. No fue bueno. Sacó Antonio Rüdiger, va Dembélé a zona de impacto, Dembélé por adentro, quería Lucas Hernández, atento aquí, si hay un pase para Lucas Hernández. Mbappé por afuera, ganó Kylian, centro de Mbappé, Rüdiger. A ver. Esto
el agarrón arriba, sí.
Que politécnico de Alemania. Junto a la marca para Alemania, ese es Dembélé con el centro, lindo, Chouameni al medio y llegó Gundogan. Llegó el bombero Gundogan, a ver. Hubo fuera de juego, confirmalo Marcelo.
Sí, parecería que Chouameni está adelantado.
Entre una oferta y la otra, ahí está Upamecano. Va llegando Musiala, no hay recorte, lo de esquina derecho. Esto es lo que dijo al menos el tesorero de la federación. Buena pelota para Musiala, remate, Upamecano que cruzó y sacó. Habrá tiro de esquina derecho en favor de Alemania que busca otro. Allí en Lyon.
Qué buen movimiento le hizo Musiala. Porque...
que resisten en el plantel. Kunde, allí va Dembélé, falta. El mediocampista merengue intentando volver a su mejor versión. Kimmich jugando para Musiala, cubre Upamecano, lucha cuerpo a cuerpo con Musiala, le propone un pie a pie, lindo duelo. Mbappé, pelota para Hernández al medio, sacaba Robert Andrich. Los peligros se mantiene ahí. Dembélé que la guarda, le pegó al arco, saca Ter Stegen, salta con dentro Rabiot y lo molestaba Robert Andrich. Lo molestaba Andrich a Rabiot, que estaba de cara.
Sí.
Dos campeones del mundo. Ataca Havertz, va la cobra, la quería Gundogan. Saca Koundé, le rebota la pelota a Zaire Emery. Será para Alemania, profundizó la cobra, Kai. Cuidado, mucho Mbappé en problemas. Kimmich tomó el carril rápido, no hay límite de velocidad por allí. Ahí va Mbappé al medio para Thuram. Cruzó Tag. Kim Manzano no dice nada. Salida de meta. Quedó. Ataca Florian Wirtz. Se pone firme. Tchouaméni. La Musiala para Toni. Toni de primera para Wirtz. Wirtz lo vio llegar a Kimmich, que desenvaina Kimmich. A los 7 segundos se puso en ventaja Alemania. Ataca Mbappé para empatarlo y Kimmich. Es más, le va a decir a Nagelsmann, yo siempre fui buena defensa aérea. Otra vez el mosquito. Dembélé por afuera. En esa colaboración defensiva. Y lo movió. Para al menos empatar esta historia contra Alemania. Continúa este viaje de primerísimo Wirtz y aprovecha Alemania, que va otra vez con Havertz. El centro fue de Wirtz, la pegada de Havertz y casi arranque. Sufre otro susto el arquero Zambá. Habrá salida de meta en la Bundesliga.
Y le sacó 10 al Bayern.
Wirtz, buena pelota para Musiala. Musiala no puede Zambá. Llegó Havertz, gol. ¡Gol! Un equipo de llegadores. Primero llegó Musiala, después llegó Havertz y por último Musiala lo ve correr a Havertz y puede ser, va Havertz al medio. Tchouaméni interrumpió. Inter está jugándola para Gundogan, otro de los que llega, ese es Havertz, intentando con Wirtz, perdón. Jonathan Tag, bien por Dembélé en primera instancia, mal en segunda instancia. El centro fue de Wirtz. El retroceso salvador de Pavard. Zaire Emery, corre Dembélé. La persecución de Mittelstadt, no pueden con el mosquito, va Dembélé con la zurda.
De todo en el ataque Dembélé, porque además tiene esta facilidad de perfil.
Arranca Mbappé, puede con Rudiger, sigue Mbappé, limpio el camino, sacó el centro. Solamente el arquero Marc. Hablando de eso, Thuram, va Thuram, ganó con carrocería, sigue Thuram, habilitó a Tchouaméni, abierto Mbappé, le pegó Tchouaméni.
Forzado, la gente estaba pidiendo por Giroud, se escuchaba la ovación del público. 5.
Allí va atacando Alemania con Musiala, otra vez va Musiala. Le pedían una falta y sí. Ganó Benjamín, pero Mittelstadt se rehizo. Havertz, Aldrich al arco, le pegó. Kimmich, la pretende Havertz y mirá Musiala. Musiala para Havertz, va a llegar la cobra. Primero Rabiot. Aldrich tocaba a Wirtz, el juego de Gundogan. Havertz, Gundo para el tercero. Gundo abarajado por Theo Hernández. Corner.
O fuera de juego de Havertz.
La acompaña Klaus al medio para Dembélé. Y quien corta, el que lee con el libro en la masa, Pavard. Dembélé ante Mittelstadt. Lo dejan solo en ese mano a mano. Se le escapó, se quedó sin cancha el mosquito. Entonces, que le corresponde a Ter Stegen. Musiala va a encarar. Musiala va a pasar para Kimmich. Kimmich hasta el fondo. Centro pasado. Entraba Havertz. Sacó Musiala. Ya gritó a Tommy Müller. Müller para Andrich. Le dio a Rabiot. Y grave en esta victoria. El centro es de Toni Kroos. Puñetazo de Zambá. Müller, Kimmich, abierto, Mittelstadt, muy buena. Y Mittelstadt con la zurda, Mittelstadt. Uñas de Zambá para desbaratar una gran jugada de Alemania. Tapó Zambá, reflejo, reacción de Zambá. El peligro se mantiene con Furrich y también con el ingresado Hunda, que casi hunde más a Francia. Nuevamente llegó a Alemania, nuevamente tambaleó Francia.
Muy cercanas cada una de ellas.
Toni Kroos con este centro venenoso. Entraba Rudiger y también Mittelstadt colaborando. Llega Müller, aparece Toni Kroos. ¡Toni! Lo que le faltaba. Un poco larga, Mbappé al medio. Increíble, le queda con los manos. pareció de ficción todo lo ocurrido. A ver, Gil Manzano que pide calma. Analicemos esto, a ver.
Están pidiendo una mano. Buen pase de Camavinga lanzado.
Para Mbappé. Bélgica que no cuenta con Kevin De Bruyne en la convocatoria. Centro para Giroud.
Él se postee con Tag y después está Pirú.
En el final, Upamecano le bajó la persiana. Gil, luego Havertz. En el comienzo, la segunda mitad, en el juego sobre todo, tras el gol de la Cobra Havertz.
Sí.
Let me tell you something that I find absolutely fascinating about the human mind. Imagine you were in a room, a perfectly comfortable room. The door is wide open. No one is holding you back. No one is forcing you to stay. And yet, you don't move. Why? Because of something science calls the invisible anchor of the past. It's not an iron chain. It's not a prison with bars. It's something much more subtle. And precisely because of that, much more powerful. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio spent decades studying how the human brain processes intense emotional experiences. And he discovered something that changes everything for us. The brain doesn't distinguish between remembering something and reliving it. When you remember that painful argument, your brain releases the exact same hormones it released the day it actually happened. The same cortisol, the same adrenaline, the same tightness in your chest. It's not a memory, it's a replay. Think about it. You've spent years, maybe decades, reliving the same painful moments over and over again. Not because you want to suffer, but because your brain, in its infinite loyalty, stores them as if they were survival information, as if you needed to remember them so you wouldn't get hurt again. But sometimes, that protection system turns into a trap. Now, why am I talking specifically about being 60? Why this stage of life? Because at 60, something unique happens. Something that developmental psychologists have been studying for decades. Psychologist Laura Carstensen from Stanford University discovered what she called the socio-emotional selectivity theory. In short, when people perceive that their remaining time is more limited than the time they've already lived, the mind changes how it processes emotions. It becomes more selective, deeper, more meaning-oriented. And that is extraordinary news, because it means that at 60, your capacity to emotionally process the past is greater than ever, not lesser, greater. But there's a catch. If no one teaches you how to use that capacity, it can turn against you. A mature mind that doesn't learn to let go doesn't just remember more vividly, it ruminates more deeply. And chronic rumination, that inner dialogue that endlessly repeats the same arguments, the same wounds, the same mistakes, is one of the most heavily studied factors linked to depression and anxiety in people over 60. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this so you can understand something fundamental. What you feel is not weakness. It is misdirected biology. And biology can be redirected. Throughout my years studying the psychology of well-being, I have identified that the past holding us back is not a single uniform block. It is, in reality, 3 different types of weight, and each one requires a different treatment. The first one I call the past of wounds. These are the experiences where someone hurt you, a betrayal, an abandonment, a humiliation, an injustice that was never made right. This type of past lives in the body, not just in the mind. You feel it in your tight shoulders, in your clenched jaw, in that resistance that shows up whenever someone mentions certain names or certain places. The second is the past of our own mistakes. The decisions you made and regret, the words you spoke and can't take back, the opportunities you let slip away, the paths you didn't take. This type of past speaks in your own voice, and that's why it's the cruelest, because you can't tune it out the way you would tune out someone else. It's the inner judge that never rests, the prosecutor that always finds more evidence. And the third, perhaps the quietest one, the past of lost identities, the person you used to be and no longer are. The role that defined you and disappeared, the worker, the active mother, the athlete, the young, strong person full of projects. This type of past doesn't hurt like an acute wound. It hurts like an absence, like an echo, like looking in a room for something you know is no longer there. Do you recognize any of these 3? Most people who reach their 60s carry all 3 at the exact same time, and the first step toward your second spring is learning to tell them apart. Because you cannot let go of what you haven't learned to see clearly. But now, listen to this. Because what comes next is perhaps the most important thing you will hear today. The human brain, even at 60, 70, or 80 years old, maintains something neuroscientists call the capacity to change, to create new connections, to rewrite patterns that have been in place for decades. It's not a poetic metaphor. It's documented neuroscience. Researcher Richard Davidson from the University of Wisconsin showed that people over 60 who practiced specific emotional regulation techniques showed measurable changes in their brain structure in just 8 weeks. What this means for you is simple. It's not too late. It's never too late. Your brain is waiting for this spring just as much as you are. And in the next chapter of this journey, we are going to do something brave. We are going to look directly at what you need to let go of, not to relive the pain, but to name it one last time and begin to let it go. There is a season no one chooses. It doesn't arrive with a warning. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply appears. And I'm not talking about winter on the calendar. I mean the inner winter. That period in life when you feel like something inside you has stopped. When the enthusiasm you used to have is now harder to find. When the mornings feel a little heavier than they should. When there are rooms inside you that you haven't stepped into for a long time. Because you know what's inside. That inner winter is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something inside you is waiting to be seen. Because winter, in nature, is not death. It's preparation. It's the earth conserving energy. It's the seed waiting for the exact right moment. It's the root strengthening in the dark so it can bloom even stronger later. Your inner winter has that exact same purpose. But to walk through it with wisdom, first you need to do something that very few people dare to do. Not in a strict religious sense, but in the most human sense possible. The act of sitting down with yourself and asking honestly, what am I carrying? And you don't need paper. You don't need perfect silence. You just need to be willing to be honest with yourself for a few minutes. I want you to think about these 4 areas of your inner life. Is there someone in your life, living or passed away, with whom you still have an unfinished conversation inside your mind? I don't mean a real conversation. I mean that internal dialogue that you've been replaying in your head for months or years, where you say what you never said, where you hear what you never heard, where the ending changes every time, but the pain stays exactly the same. If that person popped into your mind just now, you already know there is unfinished business there. Is there any decision from your past that still leaves a knot in your stomach today? A decision you made and regret? Or a decision you didn't make that still asks you, what if I had? What if is one of the heaviest phrases in the human language, because it opens a door to an alternative world that never existed, and in which, ironically, things always go better for us than in reality. Who were you before that you are no longer today? I'm not talking about external roles. I mean something deeper. The story you used to tell yourself about who you are no longer fits the reality of who you are now. And that gap between the old story and the present reality hurts in a way that is hard to explain. Is there something you wanted to do, be, create, experience that you feel time has already denied you? A trip you didn't take, a talent you didn't develop, a relationship you didn't build, a version of your life that stayed a rough draft. Breathe. I know this inventory can be uncomfortable. I know peeling back these layers has its weight, an acknowledgement. But I want you to know something important. The fact that you can name it means you already have power over it. What has no name controls us from the shadows. What we name, we can begin to transform. Now, I want to make a distinction that I consider absolutely fundamental, because there is a very common confusion that makes many people avoid doing exactly what we just did. The confusion is this. They believe that feeling the pain is the same as getting stuck in it. And it's not. Psychologist Kristen Neff, creator of the concept of mindful self-compassion, has spent decades studying this difference. And her conclusion is powerful. When we avoid feeling, when we push the memory away, when we tell ourselves, I'm over it, without actually having processed it, the emotion doesn't disappear. It settles in. It turns into chronic tension, into irritability with no apparent cause, into that feeling of weight that you don't know exactly where it comes from. Moving through means I feel it, I acknowledge it, I validate it, and I let it pass like a cloud passing by. Drowning means I feel it, I merge with it, I become it, and I no longer know where the pain ends and where I begin. The tool to move through without drowning has a beautiful name in psychology, and it is exactly what we are going to learn in the next section. Trees in winter do something that seems like a paradox. They let go of everything visible. The leaves, the color, the shade, everything that made them recognizable. And yet, in that moment of apparent total loss, they are doing their most important work. They are sending all their energy down into the roots, consolidating, deepening, preparing. Your inner winter has that exact same purpose. Everything you feel you've lost, everything you feel has stopped, all that stillness that sometimes hurts, is energy moving toward your roots, preparing you for a spring that will be richer, deeper, more authentically yours than any spring before, because this time, you will bloom from within. And in the next act, we are going to learn exactly how to do it, because you already know what you are carrying. You have already looked it in the eye, truly, with real tools, with concrete steps. Before I teach you the art of letting go, I need to dismantle something, a massive misunderstanding that makes so many people give up on this path before they even start. That misunderstanding is this: believing that letting go means forgetting. And no, letting go is not forgetting. Letting go is not pretending it didn't happen. Letting go is not agreeing with the person who hurt you. Letting go is not betraying your own story. Letting go is not weakness disguised as spirituality. Letting go is not a betrayal of those who are no longer here. Let me tell you what letting go actually is. Letting go is choosing that this moment from the past no longer has the power to dictate how you feel today. Letting go is reclaiming your vital energy from the hands of the past and returning it to the present. Letting go is the bravest and most intelligent act a human being can perform, because it requires something that very few have the courage to do. Yes, you read that right. The familiar comfort of pain, because old pain, even though it hurts, is also familiar to us, predictable, ours. And the unknown, even when it means liberation, is scary. That is completely human and completely conquerable. The art of letting go is not a one-time act. It's a practice. Like learning to play an instrument, like cultivating a garden, it requires specific tools, mindful patience, and the willingness to practice even if it feels clumsy at first. Today, I am giving you 5 tools, 5 real practices. Proven, documented, tailored specifically for the mind and heart of someone who has lived for more than 6 decades. This is perhaps the most powerful tool I know of for the past of wounds, the one that works when there is someone you were never able to tell everything you needed to say. The process is simple, the experience is not. Take a pen and paper, not the computer, physical paper, and write a letter to the person, situation, or version of yourself that you need to let go of. No filters, no forced politeness, no worrying about how it sounds. Write everything you hold inside, the pain, the anger, the sadness, the gratitude if it exists, the questions that never got an answer, and when you're done, don't send it. You can ritually burn it. You can bury it. You can rip it into tiny pieces. The physical act of destruction is an essential part of the process, because the brain needs a symbolic marker to register that something has ended. Researcher James Pennebaker from the University of Texas spent 20 years studying the therapeutic effect of expressive writing. His results are extraordinary. People who wrote about their emotional traumas for just 4 days showed measurable improvements in their immune system, a reduction in cortisol, and a greater sense of well-being up to 6 months later. You don't need years of therapy for something to change. Sometimes you just need paper, a pen, and the courage to be honest with yourself. This tool is for the past of our own mistakes, for the inner judge that never rests. Compassionate reframing is a technique derived from cognitive therapy and Kristen Neff's self-compassion practice. And it works like this. Take that mistake that still weighs on you, that decision you regret, that word you can't take back, and ask yourself this question. What would I say to a dear friend if they told me the exact same thing that I am blaming myself for? Because there is something curious about the human mind. We are capable of infinite compassion toward the people we love, but we become ruthless judges when it comes to ourselves. Compassionate reframing is simply this: applying to yourself the exact same level of understanding you would give to someone you love, not to excuse the inexcusable, but to recognize something true. You made the decisions you made with the information you had, with the maturity you had, with the pain or fear you felt at that exact moment. A different version of you, knowing what you know today, would have acted differently. But that version didn't exist back then. This tool is especially powerful for the past of lost identities, for that version of you that you feel left without saying goodbye. The ritual of conscious closure is exactly what its name implies. A real goodbye, formal, with all the dignity it deserves. How do you do it? Dedicate a moment of silence in a place that is meaningful to you, to mindfully honor who you used to be. Acknowledge what that version of you built, what it sacrificed, what it achieved, what it loved. I know it might sound strange, maybe even a little dramatic, but the psychology of grief teaches us something fundamental. Any loss, including the loss of a former identity, needs to be honored in order to be integrated. What we don't say goodbye to remains suspended, neither in nor out, neither present nor past. Conscious closure gives that part of you the honor it deserves, and it frees you to be who you are right now. This is a mindfulness practice adapted specifically for the process of letting go, and it is especially useful in those moments when the past shows up uninvited. Those moments when a scent, a song, a date on the calendar transports you right back to something you thought you'd moved past. When that happens, instead of fighting the memory or diving deep into it, try this. Observe the memory as if it were a cloud passing through the sky of your mind. Don't push it away. Don't invite it to stay. Just observe it with the compassionate distance of someone watching from the riverbank as the water flows by. This practice, done consistently, literally trains the brain to change its relationship with painful memories. It doesn't erase them. It changes the power they have over you, and that difference changes absolutely everything. This is the most advanced tool, and the most transformative. It is based on the work of psychologist Dan McAdams on personal narratives. Narrative integration consists of this: taking the most painful chapters of your story and rewriting them, not to change the facts. The facts don't change, but to change the role those facts play in your story. Ask yourself these 3 questions about any painful experience from your past. I'm not asking you to pretend that the pain was a gift. I'm asking you for something more sophisticated, to find the thread of wisdom that runs through the pain. Because that thread exists. It always exists. And when you find it, something extraordinary happens. The past stops being a burden and becomes a resource, a source of understanding, a reservoir of strength, the invisible foundation of your mindful wisdom. I want to propose something to you right now. A small experiment. Think of something specific you've been carrying. Just one thing. Not the biggest, not the most painful. Just one that you feel is ready to start being let go. Take a deep breath and say, silently or out loud, "It was part of my story. It taught me something. And now I choose to carry its lesson without continuing to carry its weight." But that millimeter is the beginning of everything, because letting go doesn't happen all at once. It happens millimeter by millimeter, breath by breath, choice by choice. And every time you choose to let go, even just a little, you are planting a seed in the garden of your second spring. We have walked an important path together. You understood why the past holds on. You looked what you carry right in the eye. And now you have 5 real tools to start letting it go. But here is something I want you to know. Letting go is not the destination. It is the path towards something much more valuable. Because when you let go of the weight of the past, you don't end up empty, full of something that only lived years can give, something that no young person can buy or fake or rush. And in the next act, we are going to discover together how to turn everything you've lived through, including the pain, into the most powerful asset of your second spring. I want to tell you something that science took decades to confirm, but that the wise elders of every culture have always known. Something that completely changes the way we understand what it means to grow old. We are living in a culture that treats youth as the peak, as the moment of highest human value. The commercials, the magazines, social media, everything points in the same direction. The best is already behind you. It's a lie, a costly lie, deeply rooted and completely contradicted by scientific evidence. Researcher Monica Ardelt from the University of Florida dedicated her career to studying something she called the 3 dimensions of wisdom, and her findings are revolutionary. She discovered that genuine wisdom, not accumulated knowledge, but a deep understanding of life, reaches its peak development between the ages of 60 and 80, because wisdom isn't learned from books. It isn't downloaded in an online course. It isn't acquired through intellect alone. Wisdom is distilled through lived experience, processed pain, and honest reflection on both. And no one in the world has more of those 3 ingredients than you do at this exact moment in your life. Decades of distilled experience, recognized patterns that they still can't see, a time perspective that transforms urgent problems into passing anecdotes, an understanding of human nature that only years and scars can provide. That is mindful wisdom. And now that you are learning to let go of the weight of the past, that wisdom can flow freely for the very first time. Throughout this journey together, you have been, perhaps without knowing it, cultivating 4 seeds of wisdom. Let me show them to you, because sometimes we need someone to point out what we already carry inside so we can recognize its value. The wisdom of time. You have lived long enough to know something that young people only guess at. The crises that seemed permanent, the pains that seemed insurmountable, the losses that seemed unrecoverable. It all passed. Not always the way you wanted, not always without leaving a scar, but it passed. That certainty, that deep wisdom that time transforms even what seems unmovable, is an invisible superpower that very few people recognize in themselves. When someone around you experiences a crisis as if it's the end of the world, you know, deep down, that it isn't. Not because you don't care, but because you've seen enough endings to know that behind each one, there is a new beginning. There is something that happens in the mature mind that scientists call. Researcher Laura Carstensen discovered that, as people age, the brain literally changes how it processes information. It becomes more selective. It automatically filters out the superficial, and it directs its attention toward what genuinely matters. People over 60 consistently report higher satisfaction with their close relationships, greater clarity about their values, and less anxiety about what others think. Not because life is easier, but because the mind already knows how to separate the urgent from the important. You already know what truly matters. You don't need anyone to tell you. You have it written into every year you've lived. That clarity of priorities is your second seed of wisdom. Young people tend to see the world in black and white, good or bad, right or wrong, success or failure. With the years, the mind learns something more sophisticated. That reality is always a complex blend of grises. That good people do painful things, that mistakes contain lessons, that losses bring unexpected gifts, that the villain in your story also had their own wound. This capacity to hold the complexity of life without needing to oversimplify it is called, in psychology, relativistic thinking, and it is a form of intelligence that only fully develops in the second half of life. That understanding of human complexity is your third seed of wisdom. There is one last seed, and perhaps it is the most valuable of all. After decades of running after goals, roles, expectations, after years of being what others needed you to be, after all that history that you have just begun to let go of, something extraordinary emerges. The capacity to be simply present, to sit in a garden and feel the sun without thinking about your to-do list, to listen to someone without already preparing your response, to look at the ocean and not need it to mean anything more than what it is. That full presence that young people desperately search for in meditation apps and yoga retreats, you are developing it naturally, through the years, through the process we are doing today, through the simple fact of having lived long enough to know what is truly worth it. That capacity for full presence is your fourth seed of wisdom. Seeds need water to bloom. And these 4 seeds of wisdom have 3 essential sources of watering. Not formal meditation, not hours of silence, just 10 minutes a day of honest conversation with yourself. What did I learn today? What did I see more clearly? Where did I feel my wisdom guiding me? That daily reflection turns experience into wisdom. Wisdom doesn't bloom in isolation. It needs to be shared to come alive. A deep conversation with someone you appreciate. An honest story about what you've learned. The courage to tell someone, I've been there, and you're going to get through this. In that act of sharing, wisdom consolidates and is simultaneously gifted. To keep learning, to keep growing, to keep choosing curiosity over resignation. Because the mind that keeps expanding after 60 doesn't just live longer, it lives better, with more depth, with more color, with more of that second spring that is already beginning to bloom in you. I want to stop for a moment and look right at you, because I want to tell you something that perhaps no one has told you with enough clarity lately. Everything you have lived through has value, not just the good stuff, not just the achievements, not just the moments you are proud of, the wounds you survived, the mistakes you made and learned from, the losses that reshaped you from the inside out, the versions of you that were left behind. All of that is part of the extraordinarily complex, deeply human, and genuinely wise person you are today. You didn't get this far by accident. You got here through decades of effort, adaptation, love, loss, resilience, and learning. And now, freed from the unnecessary weight of the past, with your seeds of wisdom blooming, you are exactly where you need to be, on the threshold of your second spring. And in the next act, we are going to paint the most beautiful picture of all together. The picture of who you can be in this new season of your life, your second spring, in all its fullness. There is a massive cultural mistake about what it means to turn 60. A mistake that gets perpetuated in the media, in family conversations, in birthday jokes, and sometimes even in doctors' offices. The mistake is this: believing that after 60, life enters a phase of inevitable decline, as if the body were an old car that can only keep losing parts, as if the mind were a battery that can only drain out, as if your personal story were already essentially written. That is profoundly false, and I have the evidence to prove it. Psychologist Erik Erikson, one of the great theorists of human development, identified that the stage of life that begins around age 60 has a precise name. Not the stage of decline, not the stage of resignation. The stage where the human being reaches their greatest capacity to create a legacy, integrate experience, and live with an authenticity that previous stages simply didn't allow for. Because when you no longer need to prove anything, when you no longer seek the approval you sought at 30, when you already know what matters and what doesn't, you have a freedom that young people can only imagine. And there's something else. Canadian researcher Susan Pinker spent years studying the communities with the highest longevity in the world, and she discovered something surprising. The people who lived the longest and most fully weren't necessarily the ones who exercised the most or ate the best diet. They were the ones who maintained deep emotional connections and an active sense of purpose and connection. Two things that your second spring can offer you in abundance, if you choose to see it that way. The second spring is not an abstract concept. It has concrete forms, specific colors, recognizable petals. Let me show you 4. At 20, most people live to meet the expectations of others. At 40, they are still carrying the roles the world assigned to them. But at 60 and beyond, something extraordinary becomes possible. The freedom to be, for the first time, completely yourself. Without the mask of a professional role, without the pressure of social appearance, without the fear of others' opinions that ruled so many years. There are studies showing that people over 60 report significantly higher levels of personal authenticity than any other age group. Not because life is easier, but because they finally have internal permission to be who they truly are. What does that mean for you? What part of you that you've been hiding for years so you wouldn't bother, surprise, or disappoint anyone could finally bloom in this second spring? One of the biggest mistakes people make when they retire is confusing the end of a career stage with the end of purpose, as if your life purpose were contained in a job title, in a monthly salary, in the place you went every morning. But genuine purpose doesn't have an employment contract. It doesn't have a retirement date. Genuine purpose is that thing where, when you do it, you feel time pass differently. That thing where when you share it, you see light in the other person's eyes. That thing where when the day ends doing it, you fall asleep with that soft feeling of, today was worth it. For some, it's passing down wisdom to the younger generation. For others, it's creating with their hands. For others, it's caring, exploring, writing, building. For others, it's simply being in a more full and present way for the people they love. There are no small purposes. There are authentic purposes and borrowed purposes. Your second spring is the time to find yours, or to rediscover it. Something changes in relationships when we reach this stage of life. Superficial relationships naturally fall away, and the ones that stay become deeper, more honest, more essential. Susan Pinker's research on the world's longest living communities showed something I find poetic. It is not the quantity of relationships that determines the quality and length of life. It is the depth of a few. 2 or 3 relationships of real depth have more impact on your well-being than 50 superficial connections. In your second spring, you have the opportunity to invest in that depth, to tell the people you love what you truly feel, to be present in a way that previous decades didn't allow, to build the memories that both of you will treasure forever. There is a question that begins to echo with more strength at this stage of life, not with anxiety, with clarity. The question is, what do I want to leave behind? Not necessarily in material terms. What stories? What values? What way of seeing the world? What love planted in which hearts? Legacy is not what is in your will. Legacy is what changes in people because they had the privilege of knowing you. And here is the most beautiful part. Legacy isn't built at the end of life. It is built in every conversation, in every moment of genuine presence, in every act of shared wisdom. It is built right here, right now, exactly in this second spring that is already beginning. I want to ask you to do something with me. Close your eyes if you can. Imagine a version of yourself 6 months from now. A version that has practiced the tools we learned today, that has written that letter they never sent, that has looked at themselves with compassion, that has said goodbye with dignity to the identities that have already served their purpose. Imagine that version of you getting up in the morning without that familiar weight in your chest, having more honest conversations, being more present in the moments that matter, sharing your wisdom naturally, looking forward with more curiosity than fear. Do you see them? That person is not a fantasy. It is the version of you that already exists in potential, that has always existed, that was waiting for you to let go of, enough to let them out. Open your eyes and know that this person has already begun to emerge, here, today, in this moment. I want to end this section with something I consider the most important truth of everything we have shared today. The second spring doesn't arrive on its own. It doesn't arrive just because you have a birthday. It doesn't arrive because time passes. It doesn't arrive because someone gives it to you. The second spring is a choice you make every morning, every time you decide to let go instead of holding on, every time you choose curiosity over fear, every time you share your wisdom instead of keeping it to yourself, every time you say yes to life just as it is now, not as it was before. Spring doesn't ask winter for permission. It doesn't wait for the cold to completely disappear. It doesn't demand perfect conditions. It simply blooms with bravery, with trust, with that quiet certainty that it was designed exactly for this. You were designed for this too, for this stage, for this wisdom, for this second spring that no one can take away from you because it comes from within. We have traveled a long road today, together. We started by looking directly at that invisible weight so many carry without knowing exactly what it is or where it comes from. We understood why the brain clings to the past even when we want to move forward. We made an honest inventory of what needed to be seen. We learned 5 real tools to start letting go in a way that respects your history without keeping you prisoner to it. We discovered the seeds of wisdom that you have been cultivating for decades without knowing it. And we painted the picture together of your second spring. That journey doesn't end here. In fact, this is exactly where it starts. Before we say goodbye, I want to leave you with one final truth. One that I hope you remember long after this video ends. You don't need to be perfect to bloom. You don't need to have let go of all the weight before taking the first step. You don't need to have all the answers before asking the first questions. You don't need to wait until you feel ready, because readiness doesn't come before you start. It arrives while you start. Spring doesn't wait for the last trace of snow to disappear. It blooms in the middle of the cold, with bravery, with that quiet faith that the light always returns. You can bloom too exactly where you are. Exactly as you are, exactly today. I propose something concrete to you before you close this video. A single action, small but real. Choose one of the 5 tools you learned today, just one, and commit to practicing it. It could be writing that letter you've been putting off for years. It could be practicing compassionate reframing with that mistake that still weighs on you. It could be sitting for 5 minutes to observe your thoughts like passing clouds. One tool, 1 week, a first day of spring. And if you want to share with me which tool you chose and how it went, write it in the comments, because this channel exists to create a community of people who choose to grow instead of stopping, who choose wisdom over resignation, who choose their second spring with full awareness and bravery. Thank you. Thank you for staying, for opening up, for walking this path with me. It is no small thing to sit for 70 minutes with yourself and look at yourself with honesty. That takes courage, and you did it. Always remember this. Spring doesn't arrive because winter gives up. Spring arrives because life has an irreversible tendency toward blooming. And you are life. Life with decades of experience. Life with unique seeds of wisdom. Life with a second spring that no one else can live for you. Until next time. And may your spring bloom.